Start. Okay, this is for the September 16th class that we had from the Intro to Helping Professions, CSP 400. And for those of you who weren't able to make it to class, and there were 7 of you who weren't able to make it to class, I decided to do this recording. I did a recording from last night and it didn't quite come out well, so I wanted to have a smoother recording for you. So I'm going to share my screen here and we'll go over some of the things that we went over last night. And hopefully, if there are any questions that you needed answered, you can email me, contact me. Y'all know how to do that because you have my contact info. So let's go ahead and get this started. And I'm going to hit slideshow. And there we go. So there should be some background noise, but I'm going to try to be loud enough so you can catch all of it. So all the problems in the world today, and you're mad because my parents don't match. This is what this young woman says. And, you know, you would think coming from the 60s, 70s, 80s, even through the 90s, that people would be able to deal with diversity and multiculturalism, but it's a common thing that we keep coming back to. There's starts and stops. And we've had kind of a slowdown when it comes to the United States, given all the pandemics, and it's brought some things to the fore again. So whether you're working with young people, whether you're working with adults, you're going to be dealing with some of these issues. So understanding diversity, and we're really getting ready to kind of handle our next assignment with this assignment. So I want you to be ready for that. So a multicultural perspective on helping. So in class, we talked about some definitions of multiculturalism and diversity. I'm not locking you down to one or the other, but there are many different definitions. And I think it's kind of so many definitions out there, it makes it difficult to narrow down on one or the other. So, but we have, when it comes to multiculturalism, we're talking about various ethnicities, we're talking about various races, and we're talking about cultures. But we'll pause here to say that race is a man-made construct, right? We know, going back to our previous slide, that families can come together from any racial background and create another human being, right? So that part doesn't matter. So it's wide open there. Diversity as well, and let me pause here. Diversity, age, gender, sexual orientation, religion, physical ability, disability, social and economic backgrounds, many other areas of diversity, and people can embody all of those things in one that may be different than what the norm is. So there's ethical dimensions in multicultural practice, right? Effective counseling. And we've talked about this as far as you being aware of your own background and beliefs and taking a look at your own experiences, but also being aware of, you know, different values, biases, assumptions that each group has. But some of those things are natural in that our brains categorize things. So if you've taken a social psychology class, there's a researcher named Aronson, and a long time ago, back in the 70s and 80s, he really looked at the fact that our brains naturally go to certain categories and pull things out and focus on certain areas. So if you know one person of a particular ethnicity, most of your experiences will be filtered through your relationship with that person because you're categorized in a certain area of your brain, and especially when it was a new category, right? And until you're able to have other experiences that expand beyond that one experience, you kind of refer back to that. And that's just how our brains work. But there's 3 components here, and I really want you to be aware of this, and this will be on likely one of our pop quizzes again, but awareness, knowledge, and skills, right? Our own awareness that there is a broader world, then developing deeper knowledge, and then utilizing skills to solve those things. So if you're a counselor, right, you become aware that there is an issue with, let's say, and I found this out where I was at a long time ago, you're dealing with an awareness issue, right? Someone is struggling with an awareness of their own sense of identity, right? And they're struggling there, and this is a person you're working cross-culturally with. So you learn and read more about their particular issue. You interview them, right? And then you also look up things that have to do with skills that will help you to be better able to solve that problem, or you call in somebody, especially if you need a translator or someone who's from that similar culture who can give you some insights that may help you better work with that person. That's on an individual basis. Let's say it's a broader basis, right? I took a look. I was aware that I wasn't getting many referrals based upon the data I was keeping of students who were of Filipino descent, although they made up 20% of the population of the school. So I wanted to learn more about the local population and also read about that. So I had the knowledge base, but I didn't necessarily have the skills. So I talked to a fellow colleague who helped me develop those skills so we can do better prevention and outreach, and we received more referrals. Rather than at the last minute when things were in crisis, we were able to develop relationships, right? So awareness, knowledge, then skills. And that's the hallmark of someone who is college educated, right? One is you can know about something or even be generally aware that there was a problem, but to actually have the skills to do something about it, that's why you get the training that you need. And that's really what graduate school is. Right now, you're working on the awareness and knowledge in your bachelor's level, but graduate school, you work on the skills. So there is a couple of videos on microaggressions, and I'll talk a little bit more about microaggressions. I have just one other set of slides about that, but you can look at these videos here and look them up. This is all in Canvas, right? But respecting diversity implies a commitment to acquiring the knowledge, skills, and personal awareness that are essential to working effectively with a wide variety of client groups. Knowledge and skills. So knowledge may be what you get in the book. Knowledge may be some data that you download or keep as people come in and you learn more about them. Knowledge may be information that a parent or family member or even a client or student may give you about their life situation. But the skill set you need, that comes from practice, that comes from training as a helping professional. So all these different pieces here, right? And I'm going to start at the white in the center, and I'm going to branch on out, because that core piece is usually something we may not be aware of until we get to know somebody and they get to trust us and we get to trust them. So their character or personality, their sexual orientation, their personal truths, their work style, sometimes even depending on how old that person is or life experiences that they've had, they may not even be fully aware of those things, but they're working towards those things. Then on the next layer is skills. Their religious or political views, and these may be things that they're not sharing at work, they're not sharing with other people, or sometimes they are, but people still may not really know about them, and they're not taking the time to get into it, right? Their marital or partnership status or their education. But these are things that people see, and that's on that darker blue outer layer: race, age, dress, physical attributes, if they do display religious iconography, disability, if it's seen. Sometimes people have disabilities that are not seen and they're not going to share with everybody. Ethnicity, gender, and sometimes that's seen and not seen, right? But that client's identity, if they're willing to share that with you, those are things that are on the outer. But having all of those pieces in alignment is really helps people have stronger mental health and overall well-being. So sometimes we can have a tunnel vision. I was mentioning before, I had a thing recently where I had some difficulty distinguishing one person from another. Because of all the masks that we wear, sometimes I can assume one person is somebody else. Particularly, and this is a common problem with their of a different ethnicity. So going back to what I was talking about with Aronson, sometimes people can make assumptions, or we can kind of go to access a certain name that we pronounced our friend's name that was similar, but we keep doing it. And I hear this a lot with Asian names or African names with our English or American English tongues. And sometimes we get stuck there and we just kind of shorten or want to kind of make this a different name, right? And we'll try to give people nicknames, but really, we really need to get beyond our own cultural tunnel vision and what's easier for us and step outside of that. So this reality is limited to one set of cultural assumptions, and truncating names is just one example. But insensitivity to cultural variations among individuals, and sometimes even within our own culture, because we've gone on a journey, we assume that everybody else has gone on the same journey. That's not always true. There's differences, significant differences by gender, socioeconomic status, maybe religion, maybe even regionally there may be differences that are just totally different. So we need to start accepting things with more proof, right? Don't just accept unreasoned assumptions. right? And we need to have a strong way to evaluate other viewpoints as well as accept other viewpoints, and rather than remain trapped in one way of thinking when it comes to this cultural tunnel vision. So American values have been shaped, if we talk about the melting pot versus the salad, right? And this is old school, like almost fifth grade social science or social studies class, where we talk about the melting pot and all these people came in the early 1900s, but we realized that that really didn't work, because even by the 50s and 60s, we're still concerned about integrating people. And I'll let that pass. We were concerned about integrating people into our society. Man, that's a big motorcycle. Right, stereotyping is not something that we hear as much anymore, and I think largely because people are coming together to say, no, you're not going to lock me into a box. People are able to get together on the internet and find people who are similar to them, and they're able to have a greater sense of identity of who they are. So it's more difficult, but it is a common thing still that happens. And in assuming that behavior of an individual will reflect or be typical of that of most members of his or her cultural group. And I've seen more, especially with this generation, Generation Z or Zennials, they're more likely to tell people, no, you're not going to categorize me by one thing or another, or I'm going to push against any categorization you have of me. Now, this creates a different dynamic with racism in our society. And some people even question if it's still racism when it's so subtle and indirect and unintentional, which may allow people to remain oblivious to its existence. So let's break a few things down, right? Oppression can be societal and cultural, but usually what we see is institutional, and that's where a lot of the fight has been, because it was legal to discriminate against people. If you look at court cases like Westminster versus the Mendez family versus the city of Westminster in regards to schooling, or the Brown versus the Board of Education in regards to schooling, right? These are institutional barriers, but that didn't change the societal and cultural barriers that were going on that led to oppression, that could lead to interpersonal or individual oppression. And sometimes when someone says, I feel I'm being discriminated against, or they're not fully aware of it, people can dismiss it because that's one individual. But if there's a group that's consistently not given access year after year, decade after decade, we're looking at either institutional or societal or cultural, right? And so it's important for us to be able to differentiate between those things, but also to understand how we move forward and if we can even do something about it. Sometimes we can't. Sometimes we can only help one person at a time as a helping professional. But sometimes if we have access to larger data sets and if we have access to larger budgets, and that's a part of an institutional conversation, we may even be able to push against societal and cultural oppression. Right, so I have some videos that are in the notes section here on denying Black people's pain. Tim Wise, as a journalist, talking about white privilege, and I'm the first to acknowledge that white privilege doesn't do well outside of the university conversation, but there are many people who still write about it and talk about it, but I'm not trying to dismiss it. I'm just saying it's a term that has been weakened outside of the university conversation. That said, Tim Wise, interesting conversation. Also, how racism can make a person sick. So I did put that information out there, particularly from Dr. David Williams, one of the most prolific scholars, in that he's written several research and database articles about how racism can make a person sick. So I put up his TED Talk, but you can follow up with him as well. Compelling video on Serena Williams and her childbirth experience, and that they weren't recognizing her pain, and she almost died in her childbirth experience, right? And then some other issues simply explained, such as systemic racism. Now, I know it may be difficult to explain that in 5 minutes, but I think this video does a good job of that. So some videos worth watching, and I'm sharing these videos so you can think about contemporary issues that may give you some ideas to write about for your upcoming assignment. So I'll just pause there and leave those up there, and you can make some notes. Definitely go into the notes section. Hopefully you have that and you can access that. Right. There's some other videos that I have here, Disability Decoded, also How You See Me, 2 great videos about people with disabilities. But 4 things here on the left-hand side of the screen are helpers' attitudes, right? What are our attitudes towards people with disabilities? Are those ones of pity? Are those ones of dismissiveness? Or are those ones of empathy and support, right? Our language and how we talk about people with disabilities. Are we talking about their abilities and the things that they're able to do? Or are we spending time talking about things that they can't do? And there's a diversity amongst people, and also what we call the intersections of their identity, where a particular ethnic group may view disabilities in a different way, and it may even be in a better way than we may view it, and it may be in a stronger way, and our viewpoints may be competing with that. So it's good to know where our clients or students or people that we're working with are coming from when we're helping them with issues of disability and diversity. And then really building from people's strengths to empower them, right? And one of the things I learned early on, I had a good friend who only had one arm, and his name was David. I remember growing up in the neighborhood, and he taught himself how to skateboard, taught himself how to tie his own shoes. And there was nothing that we did that he couldn't do. He just happened to be missing an arm. But his strength was that arm became really, really strong. He played baseball, he played football, all these other things, right? So I'm just giving you one example of many that are out there about helping people. Okay. So social justice competencies, right? Recognize their own limitations and ongoing training, right? This perspective is based on the premise that oppression, privilege, and social inequities do exist and have a negative impact on the lives of many persons from a diverse cultural group. But I would just also add, just going back to what we were just talking about, we can build from the strengths of those folks and the resiliency that they have. Sometimes that is exhausting and tiring, but it's worth the effort, because what else are we going to do? All right, so and I'm going to leave with this quote for this part, and then we're going to switch over to another section based upon some research that I've done with some graduate students. But charity pulls people out of the river. Justice jumps in and swims upstream and stops the people who are throwing them in. Deep quote. Good stuff. All right, let's switch here to another piece here, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you on the discrimination cycle. So a few years back, I did some work with some of my graduate students, asking them about their experiences with discrimination and oppression, or not oppression, but overcoming discrimination. And they were able to share some great ideas with me in relation to that. Let me get to this slideshow. I'm busy running my mouth here. Okay, so ending the discrimination cycle. So back when I was teaching at California State University, Long Beach, I was able to work with school psychology and school counseling graduate students, and even teacher ed graduate students, about understanding experiences with discrimination, but more importantly, overcoming discrimination. Because I think people get stuck on the discrimination problem, but don't get to actually doing something about it. So, and here's what I noticed several years ago, but definitely the Green Lining Institute was looking at how people view discrimination, right? 56.4% of black respondents said that there's a lot of discrimination, compared to 16% of white respondents said that there's a lot. So huge difference, right? But you can also look at more current studies coming out of the political arena in regards to how white people feel discriminated against, and that was a huge change. So we're in a very different time. So we didn't really discuss it that much in class, but we did discuss a bit about these microaggressions, right? So Dr. Daryl Tsu talks about microaggressions, and they appear in 3 forms: micro assaults, micro insults, and micro invalidations. And I'll say those again: assaults, insults, and invalidation. So the assaults may be, vandalizing a property very directly, right? It may not be necessarily to that person, but it may also be cussing them out. Sometimes the insults may not necessarily involve curse words or profanity, but it may be kind of downgrading who they are based upon some type of ethnic or racial slur or kind of stereotype or mindset. But the invalidation, sometimes it may not be very direct, but it is clear that someone's there to invalidate their ideas, right? And these aggressions can be very harmful. So, for example, someone may say, is racism really that bad? Nah, it can't be that bad. Going back to the research study we were just talking about. And that could be a form of invalidation. It's not necessarily mean or with ill intent, but it is invalidating, right? So this discrimination cycle, right? And, a person may experience it and they feel disoriented. And either they're going to be numb or highly emotional. It leads to random action and it can lead to disempowerment. So this discrimination cycle, and I haven't read too much more about the other cycle that I'll talk about, but I have some other kind of pieces that talk about some of these elements here. So being disoriented, Dr. Naim Akbar talked about, discrimination is often based on a lie, and you may even begin to doubt yourself because of this, and that's disorienting, the self-doubt. The numb or highly emotional pieces, there are other people who've talked about this, especially when it comes to PTSD from aggressive acts due to racism. People can be either hypo-emotional or hyper-emotional, and this leads to a vigilance. It's post-traumatic stress. Joy DeGruy-Leary also talks about post-traumatic slave syndrome, but this ongoing issue of numbness, disassociation, these old thoughts and sensations that lead to stress and can lead to this random action. So Dr. Sean Utsi wrote about working with white counselor trainees, working cross-culturally, and they just ran into these cognitive blocks, making up vocabulary, a trial and error approach, as well as approach avoidance, and not really being effective at their job anymore. They were effective with other issues that may have seemed more challenging, like schizophrenia, ADHD, other types of learning disabilities, and autism, those kinds of things, but they struggled with working cross-culturally, largely because they may not have been aware of the information, or they were feeling like, I don't know what to do, and they're feeling ineffective. And this could lead to disempowerment. So they're less likely to try again, and the pain receptors are more directly indicated for the next time. So lack of control, efficacy, or agency. And it just keeps this cycle going, and they stay disoriented. How do you get out of that? Right? And I'm going back here because some people, if they're thinking of these moments where they've been discriminated against, their breathing and their heart rate change. Right? So, and it's related to somewhat to generational trauma, intergenerational trauma. Similarly, those connections. If someone saw their parents being discriminated against, they recognize that same feeling when they're being discriminated against. They may not exactly be able to call it out, but they feel it within their body, right? So, and there's several examples here, but I wanted to share this determination cycle as well. And I'm going to post this also in Canvas also. But this determination, right? Being oriented helps go into the determination cycle rather than the discrimination cycle, right? You come into life and with clarity and being determined to solve these problems. You're confident and passionate, you have a plan of action, it leads to empowerment. So let me give you kind of even a better breakdown. So you're rooted in people and culture, you're clear about your family, friends, ancestors, and allies are a source of reality and your groundedness. You know who you are, you know where you're going. You're confident and passionate. So if you've ever heard people like Mary McLeod Bethune, Martin Luther King, Fannie Lou Hamer, Malcolm X, they called out all these things with an emotional awareness and then a regulation. They were calm and cool and collected, and they were able to speak truth to power. Speaking to presidents, speaking to kings and people who are in charge of other countries, being able to say, this is what we need, this is what we demand. And so their words had power. They also have a plan of action. They see all their options. They have a mobilization strategy. They review history, and they're aware of what are the possibilities. And they create something greater than their whole with synergy. And innovation is the objective, right? And they want effectiveness over hype. And so they aren't loud and angry. They're focused. And the last piece is empowerment, and that's here is a process by which people struggle of control of their lives and their environment. So they want to have control over their lives and their environments. So some programs empower and some people are empowered themselves in spite of certain programs, in spite of certain counseling techniques, in spite of certain people, right? So individuals who have the capacity to and commitment to regularly transmit and negotiate the transmission of institutional resources and opportunities are called institutional agents. That's what that IA stands for, and they can provide the resources that will bring change for disempowered people, right? So going back to this determination cycle, right? If I hear that there's been vandalism that's happened at one of the cultural resource centers, right? I'm oriented enough to know that there is a community of people that I can call to mobilize them. And when I call them out, I'll be confident and passionate and say, hey, we need you here at this time, this location, in order to fight back against this vandalism. And there's a plan of action. We'll bring some people. We'll clean all this up. We'll let them know that they are not going to keep us out of this space. And we'll be empowered to move forward. And this is exactly what happened here in 2017 when the Black Resource Center opened here at San Diego State University. And I'll give you a couple other examples, right? The Black Surfing Association. One of my mentors, Mr. Tony Corley, he put an ad in Surfer Magazine looking for other black surfers, and he received hate mail. Rather than say, oh man, I'm not going to go surfing, I give up, he started the Black Surfing Association, and it's open to all people. All right, Freedom Riders, 1961. The Freedom Riders were civil rights activists who first trained for bus rides, then challenged the segregated southern bus routes due to non-enforcement of laws dating back to 1946, and they were able to take on these racist policies. The East LA walkouts, right? The East LA walkouts or Chicano blowouts were a series of 1968 protests by Chicano students against unjust conditions in Los Angeles schools. It happened in 1994 again, and it happened in 2006. And the students followed similar models and they protested California and federal laws to just bring attention to what was going on, but it also created change in their environment. All right, Japanese American resistance, right? 326 Japanese Americans internees refused the draft until the U.S. government restored their rights at various internship camps. And there were rifts that created between those who decided to join the military and go along with what the American government was doing. But nonetheless, those rifts are beginning to heal. But it was an important part of standing up for what they believed in. Right. And there's women's stories in the 1950s and 60s. And I can keep going on and on about all these different ways that people have engaged in the determination cycle. I hope that you as a student are able to do that as well. All right. That's really what we discussed in our last class. I hope this information was helpful for you. If you have any questions, you know how to get in contact with me. bgamble@sdsu.edu. Or you can look at my website, drbrandongamble.com, and my phone number is on there. Hope all is well with you, and have a great day. Bye.